this edition of World Crisis Radio. This is your host, Webster Tarpley, speaking to you from Washington, D.C., here in the nation's capital. On the calendar, we've got the Cherry Blossom Festival. The cherry blossoms have not yet quite appeared, but it's springtime. There's snow on the ground from a snowstorm this week, but it's gradually, or actually rapidly, melting away. Tomorrow we're going to have about 500,000 high school students, young people, and supporters. Or maybe it'll be more like 1 million. I don't know. These demonstrations in the Trump era, as long as they're anti-Trump, they have a way of growing beyond the original crowd estimates. And, of course, Trump's estimates go in the opposite direction. And the Capitol is still reeling or chortling after the Ape Theater performance by Trump today. This was a typical example of instability, inattention, right? Fecklessness. This was a budget, right? We discussed the budget earlier in the week on the other show, The American System. But it's about it's a $1.3 trillion budget. Gets you to the end of October, right? Gets you to essentially November 1st. And it has some interesting things in it. It has 60 or 70 billion for defense. In a world like this, when you've got rampant authoritarian powers with aggressive intent, where you just had a battle where the U.S. had to fight off 200 or 300 Russian mercenaries in Syria. We've just had the Chinese, of course, parading their claims to the South China Sea, that it's a Chinese lake. I'm sorry, it's not. We got the Chinese building how many aircraft carriers? 3. That new Russian nuclear torpedo, we found a little bit more what it's designed to do. The Russian nuclear torpedo has got a cobalt warhead. Do you remember anything from the Cold War? The infamous cobalt bomb. The cobalt bomb meant you had a normal nuclear or thermonuclear device, and it had a cobalt jacket. And the effect of the cobalt was to create a radioactive cloud. In other words, the radioactive fallout from a cobalt bomb is much more, comparatively, than any nuclear device. You could say the neutron bomb has the least, the cobalt bomb has the most. So the idea was always you could set off a bunch of cobalt bombs in the ocean on the West Coast, California, Seattle, Oregon, those locations. You set off some cobalt bombs there and you let them rip, and that creates a death cloud that the prevailing westerlies carry across the United States. So, yes, I think we need some military spending in this world, right, given what we're dealing with. And, of course, the alt-left mushheads will never see that. But, again, these are the people that supported Sir Neville Chamberlain and appeasement at Munich just 80 years ago. So I digress. The budget. So the budget, the current spending authority, continuing resolution number 3, I guess, or is it 4, due to expire at midnight tonight. Now, midnight tonight would have been the Friday, March 23rd, 2018. So there was a deadline, and the House had passed this compromise measure yesterday. The Senate had approved it in the wee small hours by about a 2-to-1 margin. It's a bipartisan bill, sure. And if that means anything, because for us it doesn't. It's actually better not to be bipartisan. Better for the Republicans to disappear and some other collection emerge. But the Capitol awoke today to a new temper tantrum by the dotard of Pennsylvania Avenue, who apparently awoke from some kind of a spell and realized that this was a budget and that he was expected to sign it. Can you believe that? I suppose he could have allowed it to become law without his signature, but that would have generated a government shutdown because the midnight Friday would have come, and there would not be a budget. So the U.S. government would have shut down until it became law without his signature, which takes a week, 10 days, would have been quite a while. So Trump transfixed public opinion, saying, I'm considering, this is a Twitter, right? This is the twit presidency. The top twit put out his tweet. The twit said, I'm considering vetoing this thing. Now, the reason for this is clear, right? Reactionary Republicans don't like to vote for budgets, even if their priorities are funded. In this case, the Pentagon is funded. And again, we have no quarrel with that. We have quarrels with the way that the money is assigned. Try to talk about that. We want more money for missile defense. This budget has about $7 billion, I think, for missile defense. That's not enough. It should have been 10 times that, given the dangers that we face from all these different countries, North Korea, but also others that we don't know. And the North Koreans notoriously sell what they have. So anyway, Trump got everybody scared. And then at the end of the morning, right, having let this cook and ferment, he said, guess what? There's going to be not him, but the White House said, press statement at 1 p.m. So Trump came out and did what can we say, a recitation of all his wrongs, right? The river of grievances and slights began to flow once again. So there he came out and he said, I'm deeply disappointed. Never again will I sign a budget like this. We have to have a line item veto. A line item veto. Wasn't that part of the Gingrich Contract on America, 1994? I think it was. Wasn't there in the Confederate Constitution of 1861, was there not the practical equivalent of a line item veto? A line item veto. Don't hold your breath, Don, or better yet, do hold your breath. And let's abolish the filibuster. Now, he's telling the Senate what to do. Always a hard thing. Not wisely done in public. Better in a small group. So he said, from now on, it's going to be 51 votes. We can't have this filibuster stuff. Because he's whining because there are things in this bill that represent a quid pro quo. Democratic wasteful spending, as he sees it, in other words, urgent discretionary needs that are being taken care of because the Republicans, even though they have majority in both houses, they are so chaotic. They are an anarchist, right-wing anarchist war of all against all, or civil war of all against all, that you have to make some concessions. But no concessions for Don. Never again, never again. So, it has no wall. This is the big thing. Instead of $25 billion for a wall, it's going to be $1.6 billion for a wall, and that's not even for a wall. That's to repair what exists. Maybe build a few more of this demonstration of what's the best design for a wall. We'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. It is the afternoon of March 23rd, 2018, and we're just examining the backwash from Trump's tantrum of this morning, which turned out to be a nothing burger, I must say. First, he was going to veto it then he decided not to. Will he or won't he? Only his shrink knows for sure. So he during the morning, though, he did get support. He got that wonderful moderate Republican Corker of Tennessee. Corker was out there saying, yes, go for it. This bill is grotesque. I can't stand it. This is the Fiscal Responsibility Caucus. Also, Jim Jordan, somebody who in other times would have been making his comments from Creedmoor State Hospital out on Long Island. He said the Tea Party thinks this is a terrible, terrible budget. Where do we get this? We don't like it. He was getting an argument from Mattis of the Pentagon, right? The only alternative to passing this, unless you want to have a shutdown, which of course you might want to do, and it would have been an open-ended shutdown. We'll just talk in a minute. But Mattis said, look, we repeated the argument. We can't have these continuing resolutions because we need longer-term planning, right? Not just a month at a time. A month at a time, we can't modernize or do really anything. So Mattis told them to sign it. Mulvaney, the other side of the Tea Party, the establishment, the institutionalized, the Tea Party having invaded, metastasized into the executive branch, Mulvaney told him to sign it. So this is after weeks of talks. Trump was elaborately disinterested. Right? He was interested in, I'm sure, following the Stormy situation, the Summer situation, other situations. Now that he's under attack for vilification of some others, and which ones are coming forward? We don't even know that, right? What kind of threats is he getting behind the scenes? He had no interest in the process until it got to the end. Now, what triggered this? I think it's pretty clear. It's Fox and Friends. It's the fact that the Fox News Network, and remember, this means a person who is technically a U.S. citizen, but in terms of mentality and profile, a foreigner. That would be Rupert Murdoch, right? Someone who started off in Australia, then operated out of London. His connection to the United States, I would say, tenuous in the extreme. Rupert Murdoch decides to put some lunatic ideologues on the Fox and Friends spouting the fact that this budget is no good. And then Trump realizes, oh my God, Fox doesn't like this budget. I've got to do something. I've got to make some show, put on some clown show, dumb show of not being in favor of this budget. Now, here's the interesting stuff. I am interested, of course, in the contents of this budget. The main thing is we've now got a budget that takes us essentially through the end of October, right? So that's something, right? This particular weapon has now been taken out of the hands of the reactionary Republicans, the right-wing anarchists, and so forth that they have over there. Here's what I think went on behind the scenes. I think somebody, maybe Mattis, maybe somebody else, went to him and said, look, Don, the scenario is going to be this. If you shut down the government now, your veto will shut down the government, and there will be a government shutdown. And instead of blaming the Democrats or the Republicans, this will be you, Trump, holding the bag exclusively, because it will be clear to everybody that Republicans voted to have the government going, Democrats voted to keep the government going, but you, Trump, decided on your own, right, motu proprio, you decided that you would shut down the government. And you'll take the grief. You'll take the heat. The press will be atrocious. They'll figure they finally have you where they want you. And then Don could say, well, we'll immediately we'll find a way out of this, right? I just want to make a show, right? 6-hour, 12-hour government shutdown. That's no problem. They can vote something else. Wait a minute, Don. This is already the Easter recess of the Congress. the Congress has largely left town. They have really gone out of town, right? They wrapped up. The Senate wrapped up in 1 or 2 a.m. The House went home yesterday, Thursday the 22nd. They're gone. If you want to get them back, that's a tremendous inconvenience to them. You're going to have a whole lot more enemies than you had when you started out. But it's going to take at least until Monday or Tuesday to get them back and then design some piece of legislation supposedly different from what you just rejected. Because it's Easter vacation. Some of these people are going to be in Tahiti. Some of them are going to be in Europe. They're going to be in Patagonia. They're going to be in Timbuktu. They're going to be in. Some of them are going to be in Siberia, right? Wherever they go, it's going to be really hard to get them back. Oh gosh, I didn't realize that. So you better sign this, and in the meantime, the media will crucify you, Don, that you did this, that you're deranged, that you're feckless, that you're senile, that you're impaired, all these things. You don't want to do that, do you? So eventually it came home to him that this was not a good thing. Now, that's the kind of scenario that we might have been, we would have been sad to see it for the country's sake. But if it's out of our control, it would have been a good thing in terms of accelerating the demise and departure of Trump. Because the effect of that scenario, if he had gone through with it, would have been to force a conflict between the House Republicans, the Congress as a whole, on the one hand, and Senate Republicans too, and Trump. In other words, it would have set up the situation that we want. We want to see cases, incidents, events that tend to split Trump from the congressional Republicans, because the only way to shut down Trump between now and January, quite likely, not exclusively, but is the impeachment route, and that's 2/3 of the House, one half of the House, right, majority of the House, and then 2/3 of the Senate. So we were going towards a situation where that kind of clash was emerging, and that would have been extraordinarily useful. So maybe Don dodged a bullet. Back in a minute. You're going to be in much better shape for these Saturday broadcasts and following, of course, available all week, anytime you want. On demand. If you follow the American System, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 1 hour of trenchant commentary, facts you probably don't know. And that's available every evening at AmericanSystem.tv. AmericanSystem.tv usually goes up around 9 o'clock, 9 p.m. And it's indispensable because you can't get the depth of background and analysis on a simple, we have about 80 minutes on this show, right? We've got about 80 minutes of broadcasting, whereas on the other one we've got 60 minutes a day for 4 days. So that's a significant increase in what you're going to know about the world, right? How you're going to understand the world, ideology, philosophy, history, and so forth. So the question of the budget and what it showed. So Trump was headed towards a situation where he would have been making demands on the Congress. The Republicans would have been forced to separate themselves from him, especially if you were a Republican who voted for this budget in the House or the Senate, and then Trump turns around and says, this is no good, why did you do this? Then you're going to be forced to turn against Trump. And that's what we want. We want it. So we got close to that. I'm sure there will be other opportunities. Now, the impact on Don's dupes, the Myrmidons. The Myrmidons may be waking up. They may be waking up, right? We're told that evangelical fundamentalist women are gradually coming to see that Trump's cavorting with Stormy and with the Playboy model McDougal, who was on CNN Thursday night, right? A very detailed interview there with Anderson Cooper. Anderson Cooper, of course, coming back on Sunday night on CBS with the interview there with Stormy. Right? Check your local listings for time and station. You wanna make sure you see that, so that maybe since that's broadcast, right? That's not just cable. Matter of fact, it's not really cable at all. That's going to be a big deal. So there are signs of crumbling of the Trump coalition. But now here's the one. Limbaugh. Maybe Limbaugh is feeling neglected, right? Fox News gets a lot of attention. Maybe Limbaugh is not happy with the attention he's getting. Or better yet, Limbaugh is always attuned to follow his audience, to pretend to lead it, but in reality, to be running behind them, attempting to catch up, attempting to get to the head of the column, to pretend to be leading all along. And it seems to be that this event, and I want to stress this because to a normal, rational person, this budget, what's so bad about this budget? Let's just notice it. We have, again, the largest military budget in history. This is not what they object to, though. Mattis was there. He said he's going to spend it wisely. $1.6 billion for the border. That would be some very little new wall testing, I think, fixing up the old wall, putting in some other stuff. And then they've got what? The military, right? This is what Trump stressed, right? They're going to have 90 F-35s for $10 billion. You're going to get some KC-46 tanker planes, Poseidon, I think those are missiles, Abrams tanks upgraded. Again, the $7 billion for missile defense. It seems to me that's way too low. Money for the border, other stuff. They claim that they're putting significant money into the opioid budget, $6 billion for opioids. They're going to sue Big Pharma for their role in the opioids. So the border and military. And then he says the social programs are all wasteful. Well, he's crazy. We knew that. The big problem on this from our point of view is that there's no DACA. No DACA. DACA, of course, the deportations are frozen by a federal judge, but I think at this point it looks like, at least in some places, the sign-up is also frozen. This is unacceptable. This should not be. So DACA was, Trump says, tied to the wall. Tied to the wall. He's very bitter. This is the way the system works. And let's go over to Limbaugh now. Limbaugh says, this is a nuclear win for the swamp. The swamp has won big time, bigly, over Trump. Trump's call of never again sounds hollow. Don says he's doing it for the sake of the military, but that still is not enough for these fanatics, right? These, of course, are the Tea Party people who don't want to fund the government ever. Somehow they think they can be a government, but their representatives never are going to vote to fund it. The base is disaffected. Limbaugh asks, is this the same Trump that you saw in the campaign rallies? Is this the Trump we knew? He says, this is not the Trump I knew. That reminds me of Obama's famous, this is not the ludicrous I knew. He doesn't recognize him. He's unrecognizable. A lot of them say it's a Mitch McConnell-style budget. And, of course, the verdict is, from Limbaugh, that the anti-immigration agenda is gutted. It's gutted. Gutted. Don, then people calling in, saying, Trump has joined the swamp. Say the Limbaugh listeners, Trump has joined the swamp. This is just like any Republican budget. And then Trump, Limbaugh at the end, he's getting to, he wants to say more, but he doesn't want to get too far out in front because he's afraid if he does that, it'll be a backlash. So Trump says that his listeners are distancing themselves from Don. Limbaugh says he has a really bad feeling about this thing. He doesn't want to go too far, but he has a really bad feeling. Trump up till now has been loyal to his base and to his agenda: xenophobia, nativism, anti-immigration, anti-foreigner. But the agenda is now gutted. So that's kind of ominous for Trump. Now, of course, that's dangerous too, because that's the kind of situation where the flight forward emerges. Let's just talk about this for a minute. All during the week, we were talking about this question, right, about, well, on the one hand, the Maggie Haberman thesis, right, the kind of journalism that depends on access to the corridors of power and to getting leaks from the powerful, from the establishment, from the palace, you might say. And Maggie Haberman's thesis has been, Trump is calmer. Trump is more confident. He's more relaxed. He's more at ease. He feels that he has mastered the complexities of the office. He's no longer forced to listen to these experts. He knows that he knows as much as they. We would say, that is baloney. He is in a panic. He is in a flight forward. And we will explain the panicked flight forward here in just a minute on World Crisis. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Here we are on the 23rd of March, Friday. Big demonstration in Washington. By the time you hear this, it will have played out. We featured it earlier in the week. We are very sympathetic to this, and we're delighted to welcome the political debut of Generation Z. And let's say also that for many millennials, their debut was largely, for some of them anyway, for the latter cohort, right, the later on born millennials, their debut was getting duped by Obama, right, the Obama campaign of 2008, using the methods of the color revolution, bringing that all back home and using that to elect Obama. And of course, now we have Trump is, of course, as we're seeing this week, what with Cambridge Analytica and so forth. This is the later versions, right, the souped-up models, right, more cynical, more fascistoid models of the destabilization or color revolution, bringing that home also with the help of foreign powers that have also mastered this technique. So there we are. Right now, the Generation Z is having their debut, protesting. And protesting down, to the 7th and 8th grade level, right? The junior high school kids are coming out. So, again, 500,000 expected, and 1 million quite possible, depending on the weather. Weather right now is quite nice. And that will be something. And if you cut yourself off from that, you are essentially out of politics. You are a deadhead. You are nowhere, right? Because these, youth protests, student protests, this is the heart of politics in certain eras, right? And we're lucky that such an era is now returning, because this is something that we've been missing. We've been lacking it in some ways, going all the way back to the Vietnam era, right? Back to the late 60s and a little bit beyond, but mainly the late 60s. Well, that's now a half century ago, and now something new is on the scene. The Strauss-Howe theory of Generation Z is discredited. It has collapsed. And this is no silent generation. These are not meek, cringing conformists, right? These are people who want to get out there and change the system. So what we're arguing is Trump is not confident, not emboldened. He is in a panic. And he is in that species of panic which is called a flight forward. This is what we have been talking about here for quite a few days, actually for a couple of weeks. It goes back to the Ides of March, if you'll remember. The Ides of March. That was the day, of course, for Julius Caesar it was a bad day, but for the Ides of March, we have the question for Trump. This is when it became known that the Mueller investigation had subpoenaed the records of the Trump Organization. It was also the day that Trump was forced to join May of Britain, Macron of France, and Merkel of Germany in condemning the Russian nerve gas attack on England, which he didn't want to do, but he felt like he couldn't avoid it, right? He was pushed, dragooned, bludgeoned into doing this. So the Ides of March, as we wrote at the time, the Ides of March brought twin Trump disasters. And from that point on, what emerged then more and more was this question of the wild men and the extremists, right? We've been talking about that even earlier, right? That clearly what was happening was an extremist turn, a more militant embrace of extremist, bankrupt, racist, fascistoid policies in the White House, and that was what we were dealing with. And that's how it's gone, right? Tillerson out, McMaster out, and now Bolton in. We'll talk about this stuff in just a minute. So, the flight forward. Once again, if you remember the classic German movie, it's a Hollywood movie, but about events primarily German army people. This is All Quiet on the Western Front, Hollywood, 1932, 33, something like this. Lou Ayres, U.S. actor, is the key character. And this is the Western Front of World War I. And there's a scene there where they have a bombardment going on. So you are living in a bunker, right, an underground dugout, with these German soldiers, and they are subjected to a bombardment which goes on for about a week, right? And that happened. That was the Battle of the Somme in June 1916. There was a bombardment that went on for a week, and then there was a battle after that. But during this bombardment, as you see in the movie, one of the characters begins to go crazy. He begins to go bonkers, and he starts raving, right? Because there are rats, there's privation, there's all this stuff. But most of them realize that their only hope of staying alive is to remain in the bunker and hope that they don't get a direct hit on the bunker, which might bury them all alive. But that's their hope. But you had to tough it out. So for one of them, it's too much. He goes crazy. He says, I can't stand this anymore. I can't take it. He starts flailing. He rushes out the exit of the bunker into the trench, which is, of course, under heavy shell fire. He doesn't get too far. Within 30 seconds, one of the shells overtakes him, and he is vaporized, essentially, by this heavy shell. That is called a flight forward. It's where the panic takes the form not of I'm going to run away, but I'm going to go on the attack. I'm going to say, I don't care what happens here. I've got to end it. It's better to end it in the worst possible way. That's still better than having it go on. And I would say this is sort of the idea. It is, in a way, you could call it a kamikaze mentality. And I think, to some extent, the cast of characters, the Pompeo-Bolton team in particular, that's a kamikaze cabinet right there, because those are people who have fantastic misconceptions of modern war. I don't know, Pompeo supposedly had some military background, but he doesn't act like it. In other words, he's been ideologized by the Koch plantation in Kansas so that he is absolutely unreliable. And, of course, Bolton is a chicken hawk. Bolton is a neocon warmonger. All you people out there who are arguing, oh, yeah, well, Hillary's really a warmonger, and Trump says that he doesn't want to be an interventionist, and he didn't like the Iraq War, and he doesn't like the neocons, and we got too many wars wasting too much in the way of resources. Hello, suckers. How happy are you now with your wrong choices of 2015 and 2016? Now you have Bolton, in some ways the most insane of all the warmongers, all the neocons, right? The most extreme neocon of the bunch. And don't look now, he's a chicken hawk. He wants to attack North Korea, quite possibly with nuclear weapons. These are all published statements. He has wanted to attack Iran for regime change, and he wants to end the nuclear accord. And he has also talked about attacking Cuba, right, and all these other things. With very little idea of what comes after that, right? Like there's no tomorrow. What comes next? We'll be back in a minute with our second hour, and we will continue this path of analysis. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Right now, it's the afternoon of Friday, March 23rd, 2018. This program is available starting the following day, the 24th of March. And it's getting to be quite a sunny afternoon, promising good weather for the big anti-gun lobby demonstration here in Washington, the political debut in many ways in the nation's capital of the new Generation Z, already largely lost in its vast majority to the reactionary Republicans, thereby multiplying the signs that that party is doomed by demographics, by history, by the course of human civilization, the power of ideas, and all the rest. So our finding is that despite these nonsensical assurances peddled by Maggie Haberman and others, we just heard Kristen Welker of MSNBC say that she thought Trump was emboldened. No. The Italians have a word, il coraggio della follia, the courage of being insane. Maybe that, right? It looks like courage, but it comes to the fact that you've got nuts on the inside. But it's simply the panicked flight forward. That might be an equivalent expression. So we're seeing the escalation of right-wing extremists. It's a bifurcated process, though. This is interesting. It's very dangerous. On the one hand, you've got rampant appeasement. Appeasement rules the scene right now in terms of the pronouncements and the atmosphere, right? Trump has given a card that says, do not congratulate. What does he do? He congratulates. He won't mention Putin's meddling in the U.S. election of 2016. He won't talk about the civil rights violations human rights violations for Russians in the recent Russian election. Doesn't care about that. And, of course, You don't have to dictate what other people do, but you have a right to an opinion, and above all, you don't have to endorse what they do. That's what Trump doesn't seem to see. You don't have to endorse it just because it was labeled election. And, of course, the Skripal murders, right, or attempted murder. And in some ways, I'm afraid that as the days go by, these two victims, unfortunate victims, were they're kept on life support. I don't know if there are really any chances for them to recover, right? The general finding seems to be that if the life support systems were to be disconnected, then they would be clinically deceased. So that's very, very unfortunate, right? And it's outrageous, right? What, are we kidding? Of course, the alt-left doesn't care about that, right? The alt-left has gotten to the point now where, and you can see why, right? Because of the neocons, if you say human rights and oppression and tyranny to an alt-left, they don't care, because they just say, oh, that's just how somebody like Bush and the neocons sold the Iraq War, citing human rights. Well, okay, but human rights go on. I mean, there's such a thing as human rights, right? Bush the Younger did not exhaust the topic, so it's still a relevant thing. And I would have thought maybe for some of those alt-left mushheads, right, they still believe that it was better to put Trump into the White House than it was to have Hillary Clinton, right? They say she represented a kind of troubled normalcy, but with Trump, he's the icebreaker of the revolution, I guess. He's the one who's going to destroy the institutions, and then the mushhead alt-left is going to take over. Guess again, boys, no. But still, if you've seen how your rights are threatened here, right? If you're told that you don't have a right to free speech and that you don't have a right to vote and similar things, maybe you can see that it was very easy to say human rights are all baloney at the time of the Iraq War, right? That's looked that way. But now looks a little bit different, doesn't it? Looks a whole lot different, I would say. So there we are. Trump is in a panic flight forward. Now, in terms of Trump, let me just add, his panic is increasing because the stock market is crashing, right? We don't have time to go through too much about this yesterday, but on Thursday, the Dow was down 725 points. This is to some extent, a reflection of Trump's tariffs on China. Here are not especially worried about this. This is a kind of a dialectical process. Look, you look at somebody like Napoleon, right? Napoleon was a butcher. Napoleon was the bane of the French nation. All of those people who got killed in all those battles, for what? And then the invasion of Russia, a piece of insanity from which majority by far, did not return. So Napoleon, on the whole, is a very, very negative figure. But at the same time, at a tremendous cost, could have been done other ways, Napoleon put an end to actual feudalism in much of Europe. That was the end of feudalism. In other words, the early modern period ends with Napoleon. After that, you've got the modern period, right? But early modern, pre-Napoleon, because there's still tremendous, not even vestiges, but, aspects of feudalism that are still there. So what you can see with Trump is that Trump, and this sounds a little bit like the cunning of reason argument, right? This is, dare I say it, this was popularized by Hegel, but I don't think it was invented by Hegel. The cunning of reason, right? Die List der Vernunft. And that is the idea that the historical process sometimes reflects people doing something that has some different result than what they think, or the way Hegel puts it is the world spirit, right? The world, the Weltgeist, uses individuals for its purposes and then casts them aside. So one argument would be, well, Napoleon, whatever he was, was used by the world spirit to get rid of European feudalism. In this case, the absurd taboo on tariffs in general, right? We have supported 10, 15%, you can call that semi-protective tariff, but a baseline, right? An anti-dumping first line of defense, right? It also alerts you to what's going on. It makes all this stuff reportable. The idea that there's a taboo on that you're not allowed to have a 10 or 15% tariff, or maybe a little more, that's absurd. So Trump, with all of his raving and all of his flailing, he has, with the steel and aluminum, in a very destructive way, like Napoleon, right? Very, very bad, high cost, doesn't have to be like this, but still gets some change. He has ended, in some ways, for some people anyway, the taboo, right? Because the unionists can come out and say what they think. Much more important than that, though, or the way to handle it precisely, is the context of China. Now, what we, of course, believe here is that China is an adversary and an enemy. And again, the stuff in the South China Sea, seizing large parts of the world ocean, denying the freedom of navigation, massive theft of U.S. patents, unfair trade practices, all the rest. It's high time that somebody broke the taboo on that. The problem is, once you break the taboo, Trump is the last person in the world you want negotiating the replacement. So he can do that, and then he should be cast aside, as we just outlined. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Now, that old Chinese digression was on the way to noting that today, Friday, the Dow has closed down 426 points, 1.8%. And yesterday, it was down 725 points. So we've essentially got, within 2 days, a 1,150 point fall on the Dow, which is another factor pointing towards an utter catastrophe for the Republicans in the November election. Did Trump dare say something about the stock market today? I think he did. He's very unwise. He can't refrain from boasting because he has so little to boast about. But that's another factor that's coming in. But the idea is the regime has two sides, right? One is appeasement in practice. Congratulate Putin. Don't mention any of these things. Why was he calling Putin at all? Why call Putin at this time? The British government, Trump says he supports the British government. The British government says we're cutting off all high-level contacts. Okay, you want to be in solidarity with London? You say that's your closest ally? Okay, then why are you calling Putin at all? What are you doing? Good offices? No, you're not. And then a summit in the middle of that? Man, you are undercutting those British. That is really treacherous, right? You're going to be perfide, right? Normally it's the British who are perfide, but now you, Trump, you're showing what perfide really means. Perfidious, right? Treacherous, devious. So, on the one side, appeasement, but on the other side, the cast of characters is getting to be more and more of these infamous warmongers. Neocon warmongers, corporate billionaire warmongers. Again, if you have Pompeo and if you have Bolton, and those are your advisors, man, you are in big trouble because they are utopians. Okay, they don't understand war. I don't care what Pompeo has seen in whatever his military career has been. Right? They don't understand logistics. They don't know. These are terrible, terrible choices. Now, in the meantime, a couple of hours after Trump's appearance, the headline on Drudge is "Fake Veto." Don cast a fake veto. He promised us a veto, they say, but he didn't deliver. And now let's do some headlines. Trump signs monster spending bill. Yeah, 1.3 trillion. It's what you need to fund the federal government. And they're saying it's the second biggest ever. The only bigger one was one under one of Obama's budget bills. Budget blows into oblivion. Well, yeah, that's your tax cut, right? U.S. government tax revenues and receipts are now at the lowest level in many a moon. Trump vows never again, right? That sounds like the alcoholism syndrome. Congress gives themselves a bonus. That I have to check for. Planned Parenthood gets $500 million. Oh, my God, it's pure piracy. That's probably what Trump had in mind when he said this is all wasteful spending for the Democrats. How about this? Lawmakers had 1,000 minutes to read 2,232 pages. You know what you do in those circumstances, boys? I don't want to make this too complicated for you, but every congressman has a staff of certainly a dozen people. So what you do is you get the bill, you go in your meeting room, right? You got a big oaken table, and you get your whole staff around the table, and you're there. And you're overseeing this, and you give them each 50 pages or 100 pages or whatever it is, and you let them read it, and you can get through it in an hour or two, right? So 1,000 minutes, yeah, you could do that, right? The modern world for these people, the complexity of the modern world is truly bewildering because they're very ignorant, or they're playing to a very ignorant audience. How about this one? Ryan and McConnell have lied about funding the border wall. That's the thing that really rankles, that they don't have the big wall in there. Pelosi and Schumer declare victory. Well, that's exaggerated to be sure, but indeed, the Democrats have not done too badly. The big problem, of course, DACA. We want DACA. We want the financial infrastructure of Obamacare to be restored. And, of course, it would have been good to have some gun safety measures in there, but the Republicans were not biting. Now, where does this all leave us? Let's look at it all now from the point of view of Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica and the data transfer from Facebook to the Russian Professor Kogan. Oh, my heavens. A professor from St. Petersburg gets the Royal Road, at least 200 or 300 or 100,000 personal records that then allow him to parlay that into 50 million Facebook records. And this becomes, according to many accounts, the basis, the underlying data trove upon which the entire giant edifice of Cambridge Analytica is based. Yikes. So here's where we are now. So the first thing to understand is what does this do to Trump's image, right? Before we get into any of this stuff, what happened, God knows, in 2016? Now, you hear our broadcast, right? We are working towards the thesis that the anti-Hillary Clinton operations, and above all the pro-Trump operations, including in the Republican Party, way before Hillary became the adversary, that these come from the U.S. intelligence community. Yes, the U.S. intelligence community is the likely source of most of the anti-Hillary and above all the pro-Trump operations. To summarize this in the way that we've been putting it up day by day for the best part of a month now, there is a deep state. Yes, indeed, there is a deep state, and that's what put Trump into office. Trump is the creature of the deep state. The deep state gave the upper hand in the 2016 election to Trump. And that's what we're seeing. And remember, the deep state is the projection inside government of private interests outside. So from the FBI field office in New York City to Cambridge Analytica, that's all one united front when it comes to this operation. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now remember, you got to keep up with this stuff day by day. Go to AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv. Sign up for the daily show, which is the American System. 1 hour, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, about 9 o'clock in the evening. You can keep up with this stuff. If you want to know all about Cambridge Analytica, I can't do it all now. I can reference some things. But go back to, go to AmericanSystem.tv, subscribe to it, and then you can go back in particular to the Tuesday, March 20th edition of the American System. Pro-Trump London mindbenders reported they got 50 million Facebook profiles thanks to Russian professor. Ugh. British Channel 4 broadcast sting tapes of Cambridge Analytica executives boasting of their prowess in manipulating voters. And we see here one of the whistleblowers, this guy Christopher Wiley. He points out that the slogans of the Trump campaign came from focus groups, pre-testing on the internet, different forms. The British firm, according to Chris Wiley, the guy with pink hair, to make sure you can identify him, that Cambridge Analytica pre-tested slogans like the deep state, build the wall, drain the swamp. So the idea here is to take over the concept of deep state and make it into a reactionary pro-Trump slogan. Not so fast, because some of us can remember the days when the real attack, and this is in-depth, the real in-depth attack on the deep state came after Watergate, at a time when the reactionaries were very weak. And this was, of course, the Church Committee in the Senate, led by Senator Frank Church of Idaho, as I recall. Imagine that. And the Pike Committee in the House. This was Congressman Otis Pike of, I believe, New York. And in those days, if you were against the deep state, meaning the CIA, the FBI, and all the rest of it, right, including, well, all these chaos and confusion operations by the FBI against the anti-war movement, all the nonsense that was revealed, that came from the Church Committee and the Pike Committee. And those were the days when I think it was a much healthier thing. Opposition to the deep state, the rogue network, the invisible government, secret government, parallel government. That was a leftist attitude, much healthier. Not paranoid, but empirical. And not concluding that government is bad in the way that a dumb right-wing fanatic would, but simply saying there are abuses in government. We've got to deal with those. In other words, we need a reform agenda, not an apocalypse agenda. So again, deep state, build the wall, drain the swamp, and some others. Right? These were all road tested by Cambridge Analytica. So what do we get out of that? That Trump is not who you thought, especially if there are any of the dupes listening in, the base. Trump was, in effect, a Manchurian candidate. He was ideologically prepared. These outbursts of his were not spontaneous. They were cynically pre-planned. They were subjected to focus group testing. Trump emerges as a cynically programmed, synthetic politician of the Manchurian candidate variety who goes around spouting pre-tested marketing slogans, right, with Madison Avenue contributing, presumably, and, of course, Cambridge Analytica, intelligence agencies putting in their 2 cents, and this whole thing about the outsider This is about as inside as you can get. And it's all paid for by billionaires. Billionaires. Here, let's just review. Here we have the Washington Post of Wednesday the 21st. And we see here that it was Bannon. Oh, the great populist, right? The guy, he looks like he's so populist, he looks like he's homeless. He's out there not even with blue collar. He's out there with the people sleeping overnight in the park. But of course he's from Goldman Sachs, so don't worry. Bannon oversaw the collection of data from Facebook, says the former employee, that is Chris Wylie. So Bannon helped launch Cambridge Analytica with the backing of the wealthy Mercer family. That would be Robert Mercer, I think that's called Renaissance, and his daughter Rebecca with the glasses encrusted with diamonds. She's a real populist outsider herself. So Bannon was a top executive at Cambridge Analytica and head of Breitbart News. Now, of course, we want you to remember that we here in the form of this program, which preceded the broadcast variety, right, when we were still able to, we still wrote the briefing, in mid-December 2015, probably the 17th or 18th of December, we put up an entire daily briefing on Strategic Communications Laboratories, the mothership of Cambridge Analytica, and we pointed out that at that time they were working for Cruz, the Cruz campaign. They were building up big data. They were getting all these files, and they had a track record of coup d'etat and destabilization around the world, all kinds of countries, especially former British Empire places, and that includes the U.S. if you calculate it in a certain way. So we showed you, and that was a government contractor. This is something that is hooked up with the defense establishments of a number of NATO countries, right? So there are real problems there. This is not an outsider operation. And the story goes that Cambridge Analytica then switched from Cruz when he was finished, right, at the time of the Republican convention in July 2016. They then transferred their loyalties to Trump. But this was predicated on the idea that Bannon and the Mercers were going to have a big stake in Trump and that he would essentially follow their lead. Now, let's just go through it, what the Washington Post of a couple of days ago has. Cambridge Analytica was set up as a U.S. affiliate of a British-based SCL Group, Strategic Communications Laboratories. A lot of graduates of the private school called Eton, E-T-O-N, Old Etonians, as they're known, which had a wide range of government clients globally. It's practically a para-governmental organization. Wylie reported, this whistleblower, right, the guy telling, said Bannon and Alexander Nix, the now ousted president of Cambridge Analytica, they met in 2013 when he was still working for SCL Group, was Wylie. Bannon and Wylie soon hit it off and talked about culture and all this other. Now, this Wylie claims to be a leftist. However, there's a certain kind of reactionary who, like a Nietzsche, right? Nietzsche has been able to dupe all sorts of leftists because his project appeals to them. All right, so now we're going to get the infamous meeting in the fall of 2013. This is one of the key meetings of our time. I'm going to tell you about it in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So, the genesis of Cambridge Analytica, what was it? It goes back to a meeting at the Manhattan apartment of Rebecca Mercer, the one who has the diamonds all around her glasses. Who was present? Rebecca Mercer was there. Her father, Robert Mercer, was there. Multi-billionaire, heavy-duty multi-billionaire. Bannon, this guy Wiley, right, the pink hair. Nix, now the disgraced and ousted or suspended boss of Cambridge Analytica. This was the fall of 2013. They struck a deal in which Robert Mercer would fund the creation of Cambridge Analytica with $10 million with the hope of shaping the congressional elections of 2014. According to Wiley, Robert Mercer in particular seemed transfixed by the group's plans to harness and analyze data. The Mercers were keen to create a U.S.-based business to avoid bad optics and violating U.S. campaign rules by having foreigners massively interfere. They wanted to create an American brand. Here they failed, right? Because here we have Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica says they did everything for Trump. They did the data. They did the media strategy. They did the digital strategy. They did everything. They did the ads. They did the speeches. And the vast majority of them are foreigners, right? So that's illegal right there. Oh, boy, that gritty populism rooted in those mill towns and steel towns of western Pennsylvania and the Rust Belt. But, of course, not. It's a supercilious British aristocrat with an Eton pedigree, and then, of course, Oxbridge, Oxford and Cambridge, or both. They're the ones. So the idea, of course, then is to get all this big data, to merge it together, and then to venture some predictions. Now, after Cruz faded, we're coming again from the Washington Post, the Mercers switched their allegiance to Trump, and they pitched their services to Trump's digital director, Brad Parscale, the scraggly beard guy, right? The one who looks like he's a recluse. The company's hiring was approved by Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who was informally helping to manage the campaign. Kushner said in an interview with Forbes magazine that the Trump campaign found that Facebook and digital targeting were the most effective ways to reach the audience. We brought in Cambridge Analytica. Kushner said he built a data hub for the campaign, which nobody knew about until towards the end. Now, remember, there were these articles about Parscale in Texas, right? In the Southwest, in the deserts, right? Not in New York, not in Washington, but way away. So that was part of it. Now, we have to mention also, given the new prominence of Bolton, Bolton was his PAC. There's a thing called John Bolton PAC, or Super PAC, which was one of the first entities in the U.S. to hire, to bring in Cambridge Analytica. This was 2014. This is precisely that time. And this may be what they're talking about there, because if you look on Twitter in particular, you will find that the Mercers seem to have contributed something like $1 million to the John Bolton PAC during the 2014 election cycle. Isn't that interesting? So the return of Bolton is not exactly a surprise, because he seems to be already embedded not just in the Islamophobia network, but in this Mercer network. So that's great populism, isn't it, gang? Oh, boy. Those populist billionaires, they are all heart. That's a real mensch there. What it may mean is that the Mueller investigation could quite possibly bag a multi-billionaire as a result of this, right? If it's found that those connections reach high enough, who knows what kinds of very rich multi-billionaire mega donors might be pulled in. But the bottom line is, of course, a synthetic candidate Manchurian Candidate, all those slogans that some people found so convincing and so on target, and if they were, at least for some, it's because those were focus group tested. And this was not the needs of a modern economy. It was the demagogic plan to get elected. Now, what we want to conclude from this is there's a new Monmouth poll. Americans are asked, are you aware of a deep state? Do you think that there is a deep state? Does it exist? And the answer to that is about, I guess it's about 3-1, that about 75% or so of the respondents, 3/4 of Americans, are aware of a deep state. Now, that could be a good thing, because indeed there is one. Yes, there is a deep state. I've been writing about this deep state, right? There's a book I've written about 9/11. It's all about the deep state, right? It's about the patsies, the moles, and the technicians. And of those, the moles, that's the deep state. Now notice, to be focused on the state is maybe a mistake. In other words, the way it operates, it has to have a network of people inside various government bureaucracies, no doubt. But the center of gravity is not in the state, no matter how deep. It's outside. It's generally Wall Street. It's the financial community. It's finance oligarchs. It's things like this. But when 75% of people are aware that this exists, and it does exist, you can't just leave that then to these right-wing fakers and snake oil salesmen. In other words, the outcome seems to be that a lot of the 75% have a right-wing tinged view of what the deep state represents. And the antidote to that, quite simply, is my work. Because what I show you is that most of these terrible events were done in the service of a right-wing, extreme, reactionary, or fascist agenda. Wars, domestic austerity, the destruction of political opposition, all the things that we've known since the time of the Church Committee and the Pike Committee. What we've got now is this story, right? We've got Joseph DiGenoa. Joseph DiGenoa is now, I think, on thin ice. It's not clear that Trump is going to fully embrace him. We'll see what happens, right? We'll tune in to Fox News, Fox and Friends tomorrow. But bringing in Joseph DiGenoa, who goes back to the various salons of the Clinton years, which influenced, directed, encouraged, spurred, fostered the Whitewater Gate and then Monica Gate attacks on Clinton. Some of these were under in the orbit, let's say, in the orbit of Richard Mellon Scaife, not deceased, the billionaire of the previous generation, right? We know Pompeo comes from Koch, but what we're seeing now, if Pompeo is Koch, it looks like Bolton is close to the Mercers. So what we need to do is to demystify and rectify the concept of the deep state. And again, the basic idea is the deep state put Donald Trump into the White House and also secured the defeat of Hillary Clinton, but also many others. All those Republicans apparently got a taste of it through the primary election. So that's it for World Crisis Radio. We'll see you once again on Monday at AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv. Tune in.